Hook type, in medias res/shocking confrontation. The original opens mid-confrontation with a cruel public challenge. If you've got $5, I'll quit right now. That immediately establishes power imbalance and stakes. Rehook cadence, asterisk roughly every 60-90 seconds, using pattern interrupts like new revelations, cliffhanger sentences, or escalations of stakes. But here's the thing. Narrative structure, asterisk asterisk Act 1, setup, asterisk protagonist humiliated publicly by an arrogant authority figure. Act 2, escalation. Protagonist's hidden identity leverage is revealed, investigation unfolds, antagonist doubles down, legal public battle escalates. Act 3, payoff. Evidence comes to light in a climactic confrontation, systemic corruption is exposed, justice is served, and thematic resolution. Tone profile. Starts with visceral, confrontational tension, shifts to investigative and determined, escalates to legal bureaucratic thriller, resolves with cathartic justice and restored dignity. Vidrush final script. The house was burning, the man was begging, and firefighter Ryan Croft stood with his arms crossed, refusing to move. He didn't know the man in the bathrobe was family. By morning, his entire career would be ash. This is the story of firefighter Ryan Croft and Marcus Thorne. But it's also about a fire department and a system where such a refusal was even possible. A single act of negligence that would ignite a federal investigation and expose a culture of discrimination hiding in plain sight. Because Ryan Croft didn't just fail a man. He failed his chief, his oath, and every person who believes the person coming to save them will see a human being, not a color. To understand that night, you have to understand the two men on that lawn. Ryan Croft was a legacy. His father and grandfather wore the same badge for the Cedar Ridge Fire Department, a department now under federal scrutiny for turning away black applicants at twice the rate of white ones. Ryan had coasted on that name, promoted fast, known for a swagger that bordered on arrogance. He operated with a sense of impunity, a belief that the rules were for other people. Marcus Thorne was the opposite of a legacy. A respected high school history teacher, he'd moved to the suburb of Cedar Ridge 3 years earlier with his wife, Lena, seeking good schools and a quiet life. He was the kind of neighbor who returned your trash cans and knew your kids' names. But in a town that was 87% white, he was also often the only black face on his street, a fact he was painfully aware of every time a patrol car slowed as he jogged. The fire started in the basement utility room just past 11 p.m., a faulty water heater wiring that sent flames racing up the wall. Marcus, grabbing papers in his home office, smelled smoke first. He got Lena and their 2 daughters out, then ran back inside for the family dog. By the time he stumbled back out, choking and in his bathrobe, the first floor was fully involved. That's when Engine Company 17, Ryan Croft's company, arrived. They pulled up to a scene that was, by the book, still salvageable. Flames were visible, but the structure was sound. Standard procedure is an immediate offensive attack. Crews go in, find the fire, put it out. But Captain Mike Russo, a 20-year veteran, called for a defensive, exterior-only operation. He cited possible collapse risk from the basement fire, a judgment call that raised eyebrows even among his own crew. Marcus, standing on the lawn with his family, saw the hoses being deployed not toward the house, but in a wide perimeter. He approached the captain. "My dog is still in there. My wife's medications, everything." Russo waved him off. "Stand back, sir. We'll handle it." That's when firefighter Ryan Croft, leaning against the rig, decided to voice what his captain wouldn't. "Relax, buddy. It's just stuff. You got your family out. That's what your insurance is for." But Marcus wasn't just worried about stuff. In his home office was a locked fireproof box containing the only existing copies of his mother's immigration papers and the deed to a piece of land back home his family had fought for generations to keep. It was his history, literally in flames. He broke past the tape, heading not toward the door, but toward the side of the house where a basement window might be accessible. "Hey," Croft's voice cut through the chaos. He stepped directly into Marcus's path, arms crossed, blocking him. "I said stand back. This isn't your show." The moment was captured from 3 different angles: a neighbor's doorbell camera, a teenager filming from a window across the street, and Lena Thorne's phone, which she'd started recording the moment the trucks arrived. The footage is chilling. Marcus, barefoot and desperate, pleading. Croft, immovable with a dismissive smirk. "Not my problem you didn't grab your things. Now get off my scene." What Croft didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Lena Thorne's maiden name was Russo. She was Captain Mike Russo's younger sister. She had taken Marcus's last name when they married, and she rarely visited the firehouse. To Ryan Croft, she was just another frantic homeowner. He had no idea the woman filming him, her face a mask of cold fury, was the captain's blood. While Croft stood guard, the fire found a new path, venting through the first-floor windows. The incident commander officially declared it a total loss minutes later. By the time the last ember was out, the Thorne home was a blackened shell. The real fire was just beginning. Lena didn't say a word to her brother at the scene. She waited until they were at a hotel, her daughters asleep, before she sent the video in a text. The message to Captain Russo was simple: "Your firefighter, your house. Explain this to Chief Barnett by 9 a.m. or I take it to the news." Captain Russo was in an impossible bind. Ryan Croft was not just his subordinate. The Croft family had sponsored Russo's own promotion to captain. To report him was to declare war on the department's old guard. But the woman in the video was his baby sister. At 5 a.m., Russo walked into Fire Chief Warren Barnett's office and played the footage. Chief Barnett had been trying to modernize the department for years, battling the very legacy culture that produced Ryan Croft. He'd implemented new diversity trainings, which had been openly mocked in some firehouses. He saw this not as a single personnel issue, but as a symptom. He immediately placed Croft on administrative leave and launched an internal investigation. But by 8 a.m., the video was already leaking. The teenager across the street had posted his clip to a community forum. The headline was incendiary: "Firefighter watches as Black family's home burns." By noon, it was trending nationally. The department's public statement was a masterclass in saying nothing. "We are aware of the incident and are conducting a thorough internal review. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously." It did nothing to quell the rage. For Marcus and Lena, the nightmare was just starting. They were now homeless, traumatized, and at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside their hotel. Online, trolls accused Marcus of playing the race card and disobeying lawful orders. But they also found an unlikely ally: other firefighters. Anonymous messages began flooding a tip line set up by a local NAACP chapter. One read, "Croft, done this before. Different neighborhood, same attitude." Another said, "The whole crew knew Russo was slow-rolling the response. It's how they manage calls in certain parts of town." This was the crack in the dam. The refusal wasn't just about Ryan Croft's prejudice. It was about a systemic practice called selective response, where fire crews in predominantly white suburbs would deliberately slow their attack on calls in minority neighborhoods or for minority homeowners, citing exaggerated safety concerns to justify higher property loss. It was dereliction of duty, disguised as protocol. Armed with these tips and the viral video, Chief Barnett made a decision that would shatter his department's fragile peace. He requested the Bureau of Fire Standards and Training, the state's oversight agency, to audit Cedar Ridge's response logs and dispatch records for the past 5 years. He was looking for a pattern. And he found one. The preliminary data showed that for structure fires in the 2 census tracts with the highest Black and Latino populations, average response times were 30% longer, and the rate of defensive-only attacks was 60% higher than in whiter tracts with nearly identical building stock. The numbers told a story of 2 different levels of service. When Ryan Croft was summoned to his disciplinary hearing, he walked in confident, flanked by the union president. He expected a slap on the wrist, a transfer, maybe a few weeks of unpaid leave. He did not expect Chief Barnett to slide the audit findings across the table. "This isn't just about you, Firefighter Croft," Barnett said. "This is about whether this department serves everyone equally. Your actions that night were the match. This data is the gasoline." Croft's union rep argued vigorously. "This is a witch hunt. You're using one bad incident to smear the whole department." But Barnett had one more piece of evidence. Security footage from the firehouse kitchen, time-stamped 2 hours after the Thorn fire. It showed Ryan Croft laughing with 2 other firefighters, mimicking Marcus Thorn's panic, then making a crude, racially charged joke about the family needing a swimming pool to cool off. The hearing ended with Croft's termination, but as he left the building, he turned to a reporter and said, "This isn't over. They're making an example of me to cover for the rest. Wait till you see what they've all done." His threat was a cliffhanger, a promise of scorched earth. And he was right. The next morning, Chief Barnett's office received a sealed envelope. Inside was a single USB drive and a note that read, "You wanted a pattern. Here's the whole tapestry." The drive contained hundreds of pages of internal emails, unofficial response logs, and crew roster assignments that didn't match the official records. It was a shadow archive of the department's true operations. Who sent it? And what did it reveal? The data didn't just implicate a few bad apples. It suggested the selective response practice was coordinated, documented, and protected at the highest levels of the union. The fire in Cedar Ridge was about to spread from one house to one firefighter to an entire system built to burn some people and save others. The USB drive didn't just contain data. It contained a language, a coded system used by crews to tag certain addresses and neighborhoods before a truck even rolled out. Chief Barnett and his small, trusted team spent the first night deciphering it. Dispatch codes were normal, but in the margins of run sheets, in the crew's private text chains forwarded to a hidden server, was a second layer of communication. Addresses in the predominantly black Oak Hills neighborhood were often marked with a simple asterisk. Next to some, the letters DO appeared. Defensive only. Others had SL for slow roll. There was even a code for when a crew expected media, or MO, political oversight, meaning they should be on their best behavior. The Thorn residence had been tagged with both an asterisk and DO by Captain Russo's crew 2 hours before the fire even started. This was the proof of premeditation. The refusal wasn't a split-second judgment call. It was policy. A policy never written down but practiced for years. The data showed that over 80% of defensive-only calls in the past 5 years were in just 3 zip codes. The average insurance payout for a total loss in those areas was 40% lower than for a fire in the white, affluent Cedar Grove district, where aggressive, interior attacks were standard. But the mystery remained: who sent the drive? The answer came from an unexpected, silent partner. Captain Mike Russo, after days of torment, walked into the chief's office and closed the door. He wasn't there to defend himself. He was there to confess. He was the source. "I started collecting it after my niece was born," Russo said, his voice hollow. "Lena's daughter. I looked at her and realized she'd grow up in a world where the people sworn to protect her might see her father as a DO. I kept copies of everything. The texts, the altered logs. I knew where the bodies were buried because I helped bury some of them." Russ revealed the system's architect wasn't a rogue captain, but the firefighters' union itself, or at least its old guard. The selective response protocol was framed as a risk management tool and a budgetary necessity. The unofficial reasoning was brutal. Fires in lower-value homes in high-risk neighborhoods, a euphemism for minority areas, weren't worth the potential injury payouts or equipment damage. Letting them burn was cheaper. It was actuarial racism, disguised as fiscal prudence. With Russo's testimony and the data, Chief Barnett went nuclear. He bypassed the union and took everything to the district attorney and the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. The story exploded from a local scandal to a federal civil rights investigation. Headlines now read, Fire Department accused of systematic racism in emergency responses. The union's response was swift and brutal. They filed a grievance against Russo, accusing him of theft of departmental property and cyberespionage. They mobilized their considerable political influence, leaning on city council members who relied on union endorsements. Their public line was one of wounded pride. This is a betrayal by a disgruntled officer trying to take down the brave men and women who risk their lives daily. We will clear our names. Privately, the pressure turned vicious. Russo's house was egged. His wife received anonymous, threatening calls. At the firehouse, he was treated as a ghost, a pariah. The Brotherhood had excommunicated him. For Marcus and Lena Thorne, the federal involvement was a double-edged sword. It validated their nightmare but dragged the trauma out indefinitely. They were now key witnesses in a potential criminal case. The insurance company, citing the ongoing investigation, froze their payout. They were stuck in a cramped rental, their life in storage, their daughters having nightmares about the smell of smoke. Marcus, the history teacher, began to see his own case as a single chapter in a much longer, darker American story. He started researching, connecting with advocacy groups. He discovered Cedar Ridge wasn't an outlier. He found the case in Cobb County, Georgia, where the Department of Justice sued the fire department for hearing discrimination after they hired 225 white firefighters and only 61 black ones from a pool nearly half black. He read about the firefighter in Bloomfield, New Jersey, who was handed a noose by his colleague. His personal injustice was a symptom of a national disease. This research led him to Evelyn Shaw, the same relentless civil rights attorney from the banking scandal. She agreed to take their case, not just for damages, but to sue the entire municipality and the union for violating the Fair Housing Act and the Civil Rights Act by providing discriminatory municipal services. They didn't just burn your house, Shaw told them. They devalued your family's safety because of your race. That's a deprivation of constitutional rights. The legal battle lines were drawn, but the data on the USB drive had one more staggering revelation. It wasn't just about response tactics. The audit of personnel files, cross-referenced with the secret codes, showed that firefighters who objected to the DO protocol were systematically punished. They were given worse shifts, passed over for promotion, and assigned to menial tasks. The department's own Equal Employment Opportunity Officer had filed 3 internal reports about racial harassment and retaliation over the past decade. All 3 had been buried by the previous chief. One of those punished firefighters was a man named David Chen. A 10-year veteran and a decorated paramedic, Chen had questioned a slow roll order on a medical call in Oak Hills back in 2019. He was later transferred to a remote station. His career stalled. When reporters tracked him down, he was hesitant, fearful of union retaliation, but he confirmed the pattern. "You learned the rules quickly," he said. "Certain calls, you took your time. You didn't ask why. If you did, you ended up like me." Chen's testimony provided the human cost behind the data. It proved the system wasn't just passive neglect. It actively silenced its own conscience. As the federal investigators began subpoenaing union leaders and former chiefs, the political dam began to crack. The city's mayor, facing a re-election campaign now dominated by the scandal, made a shocking announcement. She was placing the entire fire department under direct receivership of the state's Bureau of Fire Standards, stripping the union of its bargaining power over operational protocols. It was an unprecedented move. The union president, a charismatic former firefighter named Greg Mullins, went on television, his face a mask of defiant anger. "This is a coup. They are using the actions of one bad actor to dismantle collective bargaining and blame firefighters for a city's historical inequities. We will fight this in every court in the land." But in his defiance, Mullins made a fatal mistake. He claimed the data on the USB was fabricated by a bitter ex-captain with an axe to grind. This opened the door for Chief Barnett's team to release a single, unedited audio file. It was a recording from a union meeting 2 years prior. Mullins's voice was clear, addressing a room of stewards. "Look, the city council keeps cutting our budget. We have to prioritize. We can't be sending a $250,000 ladder truck into a neighborhood where the average house isn't worth that. It's not racism, it's resource management. We all know which calls are high value and which are write-offs. Let the insurance companies handle it." The recording was a bombshell. It directly contradicted the union's public denials and confirmed the deliberate, top-down nature of the discrimination. Mullins resigned in disgrace that evening, but the fallout was just beginning. With the union in disarray and the city in receivership, the discovery process in the Thorns lawsuit began to uncover the financial layer of the scheme. Subpoenaed records from the city's risk management agency showed a direct correlation. The zip codes tagged with DO and SL codes had the lowest rates of firefighter injury claims and equipment damage payouts. The discrimination wasn't just racist, it was profitable. It saved the city money on the backs of its most vulnerable residents. This financial motive provided the key for federal prosecutors to pursue racketeering charges, RICO, against the union's leadership, arguing they had engaged in a conspiracy to defraud taxpayers by providing substandard services. The scandal was no longer just about civil rights, it was about corruption. Amid this legal earthquake, Ryan Croft, the man who started it all, was preparing his own counterattack. From his termination, he had become a martyr for a certain segment, raising money on fringe websites claiming he was a victim of reverse racism and political correctness. His lawsuit for wrongful termination was pending, but now, sensing the wider collapse, his lawyer made a bold play. They offered Croft as a cooperating witness to the federal investigation. In exchange for immunity, he would testify against the union leadership and confirm the systemic practice. Chief Barnett was faced with an impossible moral calculus. To secure the bigger prize, dismantling the entire corrupt system, he would have to let the most publicly hateful symbol of it walk away unscathed. The man who crossed his arms while Marcus Thorne's history burned might never face a courtroom. When Marcus Thorne learned of the potential deal, his quiet dignity finally shattered. So he gets to be a hero for telling the truth he lived, after what he did to my family, after what he said. The prospect of Croft escaping consequence felt like a second fire, burning down any faith he had left in justice. But Evelyn Shaw saw the strategic value. With Croft's testimony, they could nail the union bosses and trigger a federal consent decree that would reform the department for a generation. It was a devil's bargain. As they debated the choice, a new, more immediate threat emerged. Captain Russo, the whistleblower, didn't show up for a scheduled meeting with federal investigators. His phone went straight to voicemail. His wife reported he'd left that morning for a long drive to clear his head, but hadn't answered her calls in hours. Then, a text message arrived on Lena Thorne's phone from her brother's number. It contained no words, just a location pin. The old, decommissioned firehouse on the edge of town, a building scheduled for demolition. The message felt less like an invitation and more like a distress signal. Something had broken. The man who knew all the secrets, trapped between a brotherhood that wanted him silenced and a justice system that might not protect him, had seemingly vanished into the one place no one would think to look, the ruins of the very institution he'd betrayed. The old firehouse on Mill Road was a tomb of forgotten duty. Inside, they found Captain Mike Russo sitting in the dark, not with a plan but with a confession. He hadn't just collected data, he had caused a fire. Not the Thorne fire, a different one, 5 years earlier in the Oak Hills neighborhood, a house call tagged DO defensive only. The family, the Jeffersons, had gotten out safely, but the grandmother's oxygen tanks were inside. Russo, following the unspoken protocol, ordered a perimeter attack. The tanks exploded, accelerating the blaze, destroying not just the house but 2 adjacent homes. The official report called it an unforeseen hazard. Russo knew it was a predictable outcome of a deliberate choice. "I followed the order because it was an order," he told his sister and Chief Barnett, his voice broken. "But after that, I started saving everything. Not to be a hero, to have insurance. So when they eventually came for me, I could take them down with me." This changed everything. Russ wasn't just a whistleblower. He was a co-conspirator with blood on his hands. The federal prosecutors now had a witness who could directly link the DO protocol to tangible physical harm and property damage. But they also had a witness whose credibility could be destroyed in 2 seconds on the stand. The pressure on Russell to recant or disappear was immense. The night before he vanished, he'd received a visit from 2 Union loyalists. They didn't threaten him. They offered him a deal, a fully paid early retirement, a glowing letter of recommendation and silence in exchange for the USB drive and a statement that he'd acted alone, under personal stress. It was a golden parachute into oblivion. He'd almost taken it. "I sent the location pin because I was about to burn the drive in this old furnace," he admitted. "I wanted someone to stop me." This moment of crisis became a turning point. Chief Barnett, instead of arresting him, made a calculated offer: full immunity and witness protection for Russell and his family, in exchange for his full public testimony and a guilty plea to a single misdemeanor charge of official misconduct. He would be the star witness, the insider who could trace the conspiracy from a single racist joke in a kitchen to a citywide policy of neglect. The Union, sensing Russell was about to flip, launched a preemptive smear campaign. Leaks to a friendly blogger alleged Russell had a gambling problem, that he'd falsified reports to cover his own mistakes, that he was the real racist who targeted minority neighborhoods. It was a classic disinformation play, muddy the waters. But the Thorne family's lawyer, Evelyn Shaw, had anticipated this. She had already deposed the widower of Mrs. Jefferson, the grandmother from the Oak Hills fire. His testimony was devastating. He described watching firefighters stand by as the house popped like popcorn, and his wife's medical equipment exploded. He had tried to sue, but the city's lawyers buried him in paperwork until he gave up. Shaw entered his deposition into the federal record, corroborating Russell's story before the Union could discredit him. The legal and public relations war was now a three-front battle: the federal criminal case, the Thornes' civil suit, and the court of public opinion. Into this fray stepped Ryan Croft, ready to make his deal. The terms were stark. Croft would plead guilty to a single count of dereliction of duty, a misdemeanor. In exchange, he would testify that the DO and SL codes were taught to him as standard operating procedure by his Union stewards and senior officers. He would name names. The man who started it all would walk with probation and a permanent notation on his record, but no jail time. For Marcus Thorne, the deal was an obscenity. "He watched my life burn and called it a joke. Now he gets to be a witness for justice." He threatened to quit the civil case, to walk away from the entire process. Evelyn Shaw had to make him see the brutal calculus. "With Croft and Russo," she said, "we can convict the men who built the system. Without them, we have data, but we don't have the voices that can make a jury feel the conspiracy. Sometimes justice is a mosaic made of broken pieces." Marcus reluctantly agreed, but with one condition. He wanted to face Croft before the deal was signed. He wanted to ask him one question. The meeting was arranged in a sterile conference room at the U.S. Attorney's office. Croft, now stripped of his uniform, looked smaller. Marcus sat across from him, not with rage but with a weary intensity. "Why didn't you move?" Marcus asked. "When I was begging you, was it the code, the DO, or was it just me?" Croft shifted, avoiding his eyes at first. Then he said, "Both. The address was marked. We were told it was a low value, high risk. But when I saw you in that robe, panicking, it just confirmed it. You looked like a problem, not a person. The code gave me permission to see you that way." It was the unvarnished truth, and it was more horrifying than any racist rant. The system had not just allowed bigotry, it had legitimized it, weaponized it with bureaucratic efficiency. With Croft's deal secured, the federal case accelerated. Subpoenas rained down on the union's financial records, and there, investigators found the wait it gets worse moment. It wasn't just about saving money on insurance payouts. The union's Political Action Committee had received massive, undisclosed donations from a consortium of property development companies. These same companies had, over the past decade, purchased over 60% of the fire-damaged properties in the DO designated neighborhoods at depressed prices, often through shell corporations. After acquiring the land, they petitioned the city for rezoning to build high-density, high-rent apartments. The discriminatory fire response was a covert urban renewal strategy. Let fires burn in undesirable neighborhoods, collect the insurance, sell the cheap land to friendly developers, and gentrify the area. The union bosses weren't just saving money, they were getting kickbacks for clearing the land. This was racketeering on a municipal scale. When this news broke, the scandal erupted into a full-blown political crisis. City council members who had accepted campaign donations from those developers were now implicated. The mayor's office, which had approved the rezonings, was under siege. The story was no longer about a firefighter refusing to help. It was about a city selling its soul, neighborhood by neighborhood, fire by fire. In the midst of this, the Thorns finally received their insurance payout. It was a fraction of what they'd lost, delayed by the very system that had failed them. They used it as a down payment on a new house, not in Cedar Ridge, but in a neighboring town. The move felt like a retreat, a surrender. Marcus's students wrote him letters asking him to stay. He felt he was abandoning the fight. But Evelyn Shaw had one more card to play. She filed a motion for a preliminary injunction in their civil case, demanding the court compel the city to establish an emergency fund to compensate every homeowner in the affected zip codes who had suffered a total fire loss in the past 10 years, pending the outcome of the trial. She argued that the data showed a pattern so pervasive, waiting for a verdict would be a continued injustice. The judge, a conservative jurist with a reputation for skepticism toward civil rights claims, shocked everyone by granting the motion. The ruling stated, when the evidence suggests a municipal service was systematically withheld from citizens based on race, the harm is ongoing. The city cannot benefit from its own delay. A $50 million fund was established overnight. It was a staggering victory, but it came with a terrifying cost. That night, the Thorns' new home, still half empty with boxes, was egged and spray-painted with the word rat. A brick came through the living room window. The message was clear. The old guard was not finished. The attack backfired. It galvanized the silent majority in Cedar Ridge who had been watching the scandal with unease. A coalition of church groups, civic organizations, and even rank-and-file firefighters who had been afraid to speak out organized a candlelight vigil at the Thorns' new house. Hundreds showed up, including Chief Barnett and a dozen firefighters in uniform, standing in silent solidarity. Among them was David Chen, the punished paramedic. He stepped forward and handed Marcus his old helmet. "This department has to earn the right to protect people like you again," he said. "We start today." The vigil made national news. It showed a community wrestling with its demons and beginning to choose a different path. It also showed the union's remaining leadership that the tide of public opinion had turned irrevocably against them. 2 days later, the federal grand jury handed down indictments. 12 men were charged: the former union president, 3 current union board members, 2 retired fire chiefs, 4 property developers, and 1 city councilman. The charges included conspiracy to violate civil rights, racketeering, bribery, and fraud. It was the largest public corruption case in the state's history. The press conference was a spectacle of perp walks and sound bites, but the most powerful image was not of the accused in handcuffs. It was of Marcus and Lena Thorne standing beside Chief Barnett and Evelyn Shaw on the courthouse steps. They did not smile. They looked exhausted, resolute, and utterly changed. Marcus spoke only a few words to the gathered press. This started with a fire they chose not to put out, but fires spread, and this one found them. The systemic corruption was exposed. The indictments were filed. The civil fund was established. It seemed like the end. But in the law, the end of one battle is just the beginning of another. The trial would be a war of attrition, and the verdict would determine not just the fate of 12 men, but the soul of an entire city. It would answer the final, lingering question. When the system itself is found guilty, what is the price of rebuilding? The trial of the Cedar Ridge 12 was not a whodunit. It was a reckoning. For 6 weeks, the prosecution methodically connected the dots from a spray-painted slur in a firehouse locker to multi-million-dollar land deals. Ryan Croft, now a pariah to both sides, took the stand. His testimony was stripped of swagger, delivered in a flat monotone. He explained the code system, confirmed the DO protocol, and identified the union leaders who taught it to him. When the defense attorney tried to paint him as a liar seeking revenge, Croft didn't fight back. He just said, "I'm here because what I did was wrong, and what they told me to do was worse." But the star witness was Captain Mike Russo. His testimony was devastating. He walked the jury through the shadow logs, the encrypted text chains, and the financial spreadsheets linking low insurance payouts to developer profits. He saved his most powerful moment for the Jefferson fire. He described, in clinical detail, ordering his crew to hold the line, knowing the oxygen tanks were inside. "I followed the protocol," he said, his voice breaking only once. "I told myself it was about safety. It was about money, and it was about who we thought was worth saving." The defense's strategy was to attack the whistleblower's credibility and argue that the selective response was a legitimate, if harsh, triage tool for a resource-strapped department. It fell apart when the prosecution called an expert witness from the National Fire Protection Association. He testified that the national standard for risk assessment is based on building construction and fire behavior, not property value or neighborhood demographics. What Cedar Ridge did, he stated, wasn't triage, it was prejudice with a spreadsheet. The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdicts were read in a packed, silent courtroom. Guilty on all counts for the former union president and the lead developer. Guilty on conspiracy and fraud charges for the remaining 10. The judge denied bail for all defendants pending sentencing, calling the conspiracy a profound betrayal of public trust that strikes at the heart of civic safety. In the hallway, Marcus Thorne watched the convicted men being led away. He felt no triumph, only a hollow exhaustion. The system that had failed him was being dismantled, brick by brick, but his home was still ash. The sentencing hearings were where the human cost was given voice. Dozens of residents from the affected neighborhoods submitted impact statements. Clara Jefferson's widower stood before the judge and held up a photo of his wife. "You didn't just burn our house. You burned our history. You burned the quilt her grandmother made, the letters from our sons in the service. You can't sentence that back." The judge agreed. He handed down sentences ranging from 5 to 22 years in federal prison, citing the cold, calculated, and racially motivated nature of the conspiracy. The union was dissolved by court order and replaced with a new, federally monitored association. The $50 million Victim Compensation Fund was made permanent, funded by the seized assets of the developers and the union's coffers. For the individuals at the center of the storm, life moved on, scarred but forward. Captain Mike Russo, under witness protection, now works as a fire safety instructor in another state. He and his sister Lena speak only on major holidays, their relationship a fragile truce. Ryan Croft served 6 months of probation, lost his firefighting certification in all 50 states, and now works in warehouse logistics. He is a ghost of his former swagger, reportedly telling a coworker once, "I had the job to be a hero. I just didn't know what that meant." Chief Warren Barnett, after overseeing the department's federally mandated reform, retired early. His legacy is the Cedar Ridge Fire Department's new charter, which ties funding directly to equitable service metrics and has a civilian oversight board with real power. The department's recruiting class is now the most diverse in its history. Marcus and Lena Thorne used their settlement from the civil case to do something unexpected. They didn't just rebuild their lives. They bought the vacant lot where their old house had stood. And on that land, they broke ground for the Cedar Ridge Community Resilience Center. It would house a free legal clinic, a financial literacy program, and a memorial to the homes and histories lost to the selective response policy. The center's first major donor was the city itself, as part of the consent decree. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Marcus picked up a shovel. He was surrounded by his daughters, his wife, and neighbors from Oak Hills. Chief Barnett, now in civilian clothes, was there. So was David Chen, now a lieutenant. As Marcus turned the soil, he wasn't burying the past. He was planting something new in its place. But the story had one final, surprising twist. 2 years after the trial, during the renovation of the old, decommissioned Mill Road firehouse into a community museum, workers found a metal box welded to the underside of the chief's old desk. Inside was a single, handwritten ledger. It was the original DO log, started in the 1990s by a fire chief long since retired. The entries were in neat, meticulous script, assigning code letters to entire streets and neighborhoods. At the bottom of the first page was a note: to protect the fiscal health of the department and the character of our community. The ledger was donated to the new museum. It sits under glass, next to the Thorne family's fireproof box that was recovered from the ashes, its contents charred but legible. The two boxes, side by side, tell the complete story, one of preservation through exclusion, the other of preservation through love. One box was meant to hide a secret system, the other was meant to protect a family's history. The Cedar Ridge Fire Department now holds its annual memorial service at the community center. They honor firefighters who died in the line of duty, and they also read the names of families who lost homes during the years of the selective response. It is a public act of remembrance and accountability. Marcus Thorne still teaches history. His lesson plan on civil rights now includes a unit on municipal services. He shows his students the viral video from his lawn. He tells them that sometimes justice is not a lightning bolt, but a slow, grinding machine that requires witnesses, data, courage, and unbearable patience to turn. He tells them that systems are made of people, and people can change them. The last image of this story is not of a burning house or a courtroom. It is of Marcus standing in front of his new history class, holding up that recovered fire-damaged deed to his family's land. The paper is brittle, the edges burnt, but the writing is clear. He tells his students, "They tried to burn this. They failed. What we choose to save tells the world who we are." The fire on Maple Street is out. The institutions that allowed it to burn have been reformed. The men who lit the match of injustice are in prison. And from the ashes, a community learned a brutal, essential truth: that the most dangerous fires are not the ones that burn houses, but the ones that smolder in the heart of a system, waiting for someone with the courage to say, "This stops here." The story of Cedar Ridge is a warning and a blueprint. Because a system built to save only some people is a system that will eventually consume itself. Cedar Ridge is not an outlier. It is a case study. From Portland to Cobb County to Bloomfield, the pattern repeats. Fire departments, those institutions we unquestioningly trust with our lives, grappling with the same legacy of discrimination that infects every corner of society. The story of Ryan Croft and Marcus Thorne asks us an uncomfortable question. When you dial 911, who does the person on the other end of that call imagine they are coming to save? The reform in Cedar Ridge was hard-won. It took a whistleblower with a guilty conscience, a chief willing to burn his career to the ground, a family that refused to be silenced, and data that could not be ignored. But most places don't have a perfect storm of evidence and courage. Most injustices smolder unseen. This is about more than firefighting. It is about every public service we fund with our taxes and our trust. It is about the hidden algorithms in lending, the subtle biases in policing, the coded language in zoning laws. It is about the distance between a mission statement on a wall and the actions taken on a lawn in the dead of night. The lesson of Cedar Ridge is not that all systems are corrupt. The lesson is that no system is immune. Vigilance is not a one-time act. It is a civic duty. It requires asking who gets the defensive response and who gets the hero's effort. It requires looking at the data, listening to the whispers, and believing the people who say they were left to burn. Marcus Thorne saved a box of papers from a fire. Mike Russo saved a USB drive of secrets. Together, they saved a community from itself. What they protected was more than property or evidence. They protected the idea that a promise, to serve and protect, must mean everyone or it means nothing. The next time you see a fire truck race by, sirens wailing, remember this story. Remember that the contract between a society and its protectors is written in moments of crisis. It is renewed every time someone chooses to run into a burning building, and it is broken every time someone decides not to. These are the stories that map the fault lines in our foundations. They show us where the pressure is building and what might happen if we don't pay attention. If you want to see more maps, more stories that hold power to account, make sure you subscribe. Wherever you are in the world, your attention is the first, essential tool for justice.